We're very excited about sharing tonight's program featuring David Hill and Dick Preston of the Tennessee Ornithological Society. But first, I would like to take this opportunity to remind everyone that next Saturday, the Conservancy is hosting its first Saturday paddle down the Lost Swamp section of the Wolf River. Please see our website, wolfriver.org, for RSVP and registration information. I would also like to acknowledge all of our benefactors for 2024. They are the Crawford Howard Family Foundation, TC Energy, Bank of America, AutoZone, FedEx, the Hyde Family Foundation, Buckman, International Paper, Jim Karras Subaru, Terminex, Ring Container Technologies, Brother International Corporation, First Horizon Foundation, and Silvano. Thank you for their ongoing support. Of course, all of our supporters, corporations, individual donors, and volunteers are critically important in allowing us to deliver on our mission, the protection and enhancement of the Wolf River watershed as a sustainable natural resource. As always, gifts of any size are appreciated. Please see our website at www.wolfriver.org/give. And finally, a few housekeeping details. We ask that you do not attempt to record this program with any device. If you have any questions during the program, please use the Q&A feature and not the chat box. Our education director, Kathy Justice, will be monitoring the questions and will ask them after the program. Now, it is my pleasure to present to our speakers for this evening. Dick Preston is a past president of the Tennessee Ornithological Society, a position he held for 4 years. He currently serves as the Society's vice president and conservation co-chair. Dick combines his passion for birds with his love of travel, which has taken him to 57 countries so far, and enabled him to see over 6,700 of the world's 11,100 species of birds. Dick is active in many bird-related citizen science projects, such as the U.S. Geological Survey's annual breeding bird survey and the Audubon Society's annual Christmas bird dance. Mr. David Hill studied ornithology until, at age 24, he changed career paths. Since then, he has directed his attention to conservation. He founded RARE Incorporated, now rare.org, in 1974, which to this day conducts multi-million-dollar worldwide environmental programs. Today, he manages roughly 100 bluebird boxes locally as part of the Memphis chapter of the Tennessee Ornithological Society. He has served on several national boards and was twice a member of the U.S. delegation to international environmental conventions. He has birded for 72 years and on 6 of the 7 continents. His articles and photographs have been widely published. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Dick Preston and Mr. David Hill.
Well, thank you very much, Eric, for the introduction. I also would like to thank Kathy and for inviting us, and Natalie, who helped with some of the technical details. I started this project or program, whatever you want to call it, about 8 years ago with the help of my wife, Elizabeth, and we started this at Shelby Farms. After about 2 years, we expanded into other areas, and at that point, it really got beyond what my wife was willing to do. And fortunately, Dick Preston stepped forward, and whom I'd known through birding quite well, and he volunteered to help, and he has been just helped enormously throughout this whole project. Right up, basically, he was with me full-time on all this until the spring when he was doing some traveling, and fortunately, another birder and colleague at TM Memphis chapter, Jim Varner, he also volunteered to help. And so this spring when Dick was away, Jim Varner helped a great deal. And in fact, when we put up some prothonotary warbler boxes in the spring in the middle of a cypress swamp, it took all 3 of us to do that. How this program is going to work is that I'm going to do the first half of the presentation and Dick will do the second half. I hope we can handle that smoothly with us swapping chairs here. We're going to now start talking about bluebirds, finally. The color blue is quite rare in the world of birds. Here in the eastern United States, only 9 species of songbirds show extensive blue feathering, of which the blue jay, quite obviously, is the most familiar. But it is in the 3 species of bluebirds, members of the thrush family, along with robins, where we find the most dramatic use of color. This eastern bluebird male, which carries the sky on his back, in the words of Henry David Thoreau, is, in my opinion, the most beautiful of the 3. The female, although more muted in color, has a special elegance of her own. Their range extends from southeastern Canada down through much of Central America, as well as the island of Bermuda. Similarly colored, but less bright, is this male western bluebird. Here we see a pair of western bluebirds using a natural nest cavity. And here a closer look at the female western bluebird. The western bluebird's range extends just barely into British Columbia, Canada, to the north, but deeply into Mexico. The male mountain bluebird is entirely blue. Sorry, I got lost here. The female mountain bluebird shows blue mostly in the wings and tail. The mountain bluebird occupies the higher elevations of the American West, and its range extends all the way into the interior of Alaska. Our discussion today will focus on our local eastern bluebird population. Prior to the introduction of 2 invasive species that competed for natural cavities, all 3 species of bluebirds relied on abandoned woodpecker holes to raise their young. The lack of such often forces bluebirds to use seemingly unsuitable sites. Here is one such place, an old apple tree. I was intrigued and followed this pair throughout the entire nesting cycle. Here the female is surreptitiously bringing in nesting material. Only the female does so. Weeks later, we find the male removing fecal sacs. This, of course, is what Dick Preston's and my efforts have all been about. A successful nesting bluebird, in this case, a male bringing in food. Hatchie National Wildlife Refuge is one of our principal bluebird management sites. We currently have 25 boxes there. Did I skip a slide? Yes, I did, sorry. Hatchie National Wildlife Refuge is one of our principal bluebird management sites. We have 25 boxes there. Wolf River Wildlife Management is another key area for us, and we have 29 boxes there. That's in LaGrange, Tennessee, for those who are not familiar. Shelby Farms Park is another very productive site for bluebirds. We have 31 boxes being monitored there in the adjoining Ag Center property. When necessary, bluebirds will adopt any suitable nest site, including purple martin houses. When hard-pressed, they will even employ previously used wood duck boxes, in which case they are forced to build huge nests in the bottom while using only a tiny portion. Certainly not efficient. Here is another such case with the male at the entrance hole of a wood duck box. This is one of our early batches of relatively inexpensive red cedar boxes. They can be purchased at any Walmart and will hold up well for a few seasons, but have one very serious drawback, which I will discuss. If the very smooth wood below the entrance hole is not scarred or roughed up, even adult swallows with their tiny feet cannot climb out and will be trapped inside and starve to death. This step is essential for anybody using finished lumber. This later batch of 25 was custom made for us in Western white cedar by a man in Oregon. Especially near water, we often find tree swallows using our boxes, a most welcome tenant. This obviously is the adult male. This pair is using an experimental woodcrete material bluebird box that I was able to obtain and use successfully when conducting my work in Quebec. Here is a characteristic tree swallow nest lined with white feathers. Pure white eggs are a prime indicator. Here is another with 5 eggs. Both black-capped and Carolina chickadees will frequently use bluebird boxes, especially near wooded areas. They too make most welcome tenants. They build gorgeous nests of moss, which are usually lined with mammal hair. They are such fastidious housekeepers. Even after the young fledge, the nest, aside from being tamped down, is left in remarkably clean condition. You certainly won't see that with many other species. Infrequently, white-breasted nuthatches will use nest boxes. Another unusual tenant, but equally welcome, is the tufted titmouse, with which I'm sure most of you are familiar. This particular shy female refused to pose for a photo anywhere near the box. All I could get was her butt end. A wonderful surprise in 2022 was finding prothonotary warblers nesting in one of our boxes at Hatchie National Wildlife Refuge. This year, prothonotaries used 5 of our boxes in various locations, 3 of which we had placed in cypress swamps, as I mentioned earlier, specifically for them. In some areas, house wrens, a native species, can be a problem. Careful box placement, 40 feet or more away from bushes and trees, can usually prevent this. House wrens are known to destroy bluebird eggs. And now for the very unwelcome potential users of bluebird boxes. European starlings nearly wiped out bluebirds in the early part of the 20th century by aggressively taking over most natural cavities. Under natural conditions, starlings pose a huge threat to bluebirds, but boxes with a proper 1 1/2 inch diameter entrance hole will exclude them. Properly made and monitored nest boxes are largely responsible for the bluebird's recovery throughout the country. But it is the house sparrow, not related in any way to our North American sparrows, which was also imported from Europe, that present the greatest threat to bluebirds. Being smaller, hole size doesn't work in this case. Here we see a male trying to attract a female to a bluebird box. It apparently worked because here is the female. In a box near Hatchie headquarters, where we had ongoing house sparrow problems, we came upon this disturbing scene. House sparrows are known to enter an active bluebird nest and either break the eggs or kill and even decapitate an incubating female, as we see here. Where house sparrows cannot be eliminated, bluebird intensive areas, this dreadful scene can best be avoided by a 2-hole box, which gives an attacked bluebird an escape route. A typically messy and garbage-strewn house sparrow nest. Gum wrappers, cellophane, and feathers of every description, cigarette butts included, are often found in these nests. Their eggs are slightly larger than bluebird eggs and heavily marked. Here is a bluebird egg that was destroyed by a house sparrow. We occasionally find mice nesting in our boxes. This is probably a family of meadow jumping mice. We ultimately decided to leave this native rodent species alone. This southern flying squirrel raided an active bluebird nest, ate the eggs, and took over the box. You can see the egg there. Here is another individual after we scared it out of the box. We respect their rights to decent housing too, and after discovering them, we now leave them be. This is some of the things that bluebirds have to contend with, and I'll just leave this chart on for a second for you to glance over. I will be discussing each of these items briefly. Raccoons pose a serious threat to bluebirds, especially when boxes are placed on trees, which we discourage. This is what a raccoon predation looks like. Typically, a raccoon will climb the tree, reach inside, and pull out either eggs, young, or even an incubating female. And after they've done that, this is typically what you see. Predator guards are very efficient, but add significantly to both the cost and effort involved. Baffles like these are also very effective against snakes and virtually all other terrestrial predators. This seemingly undisturbed nest is how it looked after a black rat snake climbed the pole and ate 3 young chicks. Raptors like this red-shouldered hawk will readily take bluebirds, especially naive young birds. This is what happened to a hand-raised orphan bluebird on one of its first days out on its own. It adapted quickly to flying to and from its human parent, but was not wise in the ways of nature. The local red-shouldered hawk quickly made off with Junior. Cooper's hawks are another potential predator that feeds mostly on songbirds. Ant infestations can be a serious problem in certain areas. Here you see an advanced ant nest with a full batch of ant eggs. Ants eventually made this bluebird pair abandon their eggs, and you can see the eggs have already started changing color. In a recent case where stinging ants were swarming over these young hatchlings, we were able to intervene in time. The nest was removed, ants were destroyed, and the box was treated with repellent before the nest was replaced. This particular photograph is of a different one than I just spoke. We've had good success with this if the problem is discovered early. Wasps have been a particular problem at Wolf River Wildlife Management Area, especially with old boxes placed on utility poles. And on this box you see here, you can see on the door as raised, you can see this very large wasp nest. These 2 mud dauber nests were removed from the single box just shown. Fortunately, wasps seem mainly to take over bluebird boxes after their first brood has fledged. Blowflies were a particular problem in Connecticut where I used to work with bluebirds, but wasps are certainly the more common problem in this area. Blowfly larvae will suck bloods from nestlings. This is why it was important, especially there, to clean out the boxes after the first brood fledged, allowing bluebirds to start a second brood with a clean, new, parasite-free nest. It now gives me great pleasure to turn the program over to my friend and colleague, Dick Preston.
Okay, thank you, David. Amongst the many hazards, causes of mortality in bluebirds are ice storms, and particularly severe ice storms. Anywhere from 100,000 to 1 million birds can easily be killed during a single event. Back in February of 2021 was the last big one we had here. Mortality rates exceeded 90%, really crashing the total population. Bluebirds typically maintain about a day, day and a half to no more than 2 days worth of fat reserves. When these ice storms hit, they will coat the trees, the bushes, the shrubs, all the things that contain the small fruits and berries that bluebirds need in the wintertime. If it lasts for more than 3 or 4 days, like it did in February of 21, that lasted a full week of sub-freezing temperatures, they simply cannot obtain the food they need to survive. By the second, third day, if they have not found food, mortality will ensue. And here you'll see what happens. Again, they simply cannot get to the fruits. Winter diet is almost entirely small fruits and berries. In our area, smooth sumac, staghorn sumac are the bulk of the winter diet, and they simply can't get to that when it's covered with ice. They will survive the temperature if they can find sufficient food. Again, after early in the third day, if they have not found food, this is what happens. We find this on occasion. This, during that ice storm, this was the birds we found in one of the boxes at Shelby Farms. In the winter, the birds will roost communally. Some of the boxes will contain 4, 5, 6, 7, as many as 10 individuals in a single box. So these birds simply did not find enough food to survive. The secondary effect of storms, particularly ice, the collapse of older trees, the elimination of dead branches that collapse, it removes natural cavities. So all those woodpecker holes that you find in the older trees and the dead branches, gone. So again, that's why we really started this program. David did 8 years ago. It's to provide sufficient cavities, artificial cavities by nest boxes. It helps these bluebirds overcome the really disastrous events like ice storms, severe winter weather. We monitor the boxes regularly throughout the year. We clean them after the winter season. At the onset of the breeding season, starts here late March, early April. People often wonder, does it disturb the birds? No, it does not. Bluebirds are amazingly tolerant. They're tenacious. Within oftentimes seconds, if not minutes, after we open a box and examine it, the adults will return to the box, primarily the female. Usually before we can get in the car and drive away, she's returned to the box. So it has very little effect on the adult birds. They will not abandon the nest when we open the boxes. When we do open the boxes, this is what we hope to find. That is a full clutch of bluebird eggs, typical clutch. Range can be from 2 to 7 eggs. The most common, more than half of all the nests, a full set of eggs will be 5. The second most common is 4, 3 and 6 being the common, but not nearly as common. They're 3 to 4% of the clutches will be 3 or 6 eggs. Again, a typical clutch. Notice how well constructed the nest is. Bluebirds, Eastern bluebirds, do not use any live material. All the material is dead. Dead and flexible seems to be the key. And uniformity is a key as well. If they start the nest building, female builds the nest alone. If she starts building it with dried grass, as here, the whole nest will be dried grass. If she starts with pine needles, the whole nest will be pine needles. Well constructed, always a very neat looking nest. 6 eggs, again, not uncommon, but far less common than 4 or 5. Occasionally we come across a nest with the eggs are white. David mentioned the tree swallows have white eggs. Occasionally at the hatchie, First glance, you're not sure if they're tree swallow or bluebird. Bluebird eggs are slightly larger, and the nest itself, the construction of the nest will tell you whether you've got a bluebird or a tree swallow. Bluebirds occasionally will put a single feather in a nest. Tree swallows put lots of feathers in the nest. Interesting, white eggs only constitute about 1 to 2% of all the clutches. Both the male and female carry the gene that determines the color of an egg. They both carry a white and a blue, blue being the dominant. So whichever one of those is expressed will determine the color of the egg. It takes both adults to have the dominant white gene to make the eggs white. So if the male has got a blue expressed gene, the female has white, the eggs will be blue. If the female has a blue and the male has white, the eggs will still be blue. So both adults have to express the white gene. And that's why it's a very rare combination. Again, 1 to 2%. Some localities it might go to 9 or 10%, and that's probably due to inbreeding of a close number of boxes. When we inspect the boxes after fledging, we know what the timeline is from the time the first egg is laid, the incubation period, the brooding period. We can pretty well guess when the birds have fledged. We'll go in and inspect the boxes, clean them, maintain them. And occasionally we'll find infertile eggs. Here's a pair of them. The rest of the birds fledged. As David noted earlier, even after the breeding activity, the nest itself is pretty clean. Chickadees are really good at keeping that clean nest. Here's another infertile egg. Again, this was a successful clutch. And you do note at the top of the screen, there's a single feather. Again, bluebirds, most nests do not have feathers or any other material, but if they do use a feather, it's generally just one. Why? Nobody knows. We observe nestlings at all stages of development. This is a pair here that on their very first day, they're what we call altricial. They are naked, just wispy, downy feathers. Eyes are closed. Feathers develop very quickly. Within a couple of days, the pin feathers have emerged. 4 or 5 days, they have a pretty good covering of contour feathers on the body. Eyes don't open until about the 5th or 6th day. This is a clutch that's about 1/3 of the way through. These guys are about 6 days old. And a couple of days older, these guys are around 8 or 9 days old. And this is a clutch that is right around 12, 13 days at the most. This is the time when David would undertake banding them. Their proper age and size to be safely handled and bands to be attached. David has long since given up his banding certificate. So this photo here was from back in the 1970s. During banding, typically you want to take the young out of the nest and put them in a safe container like here. Number one, it keeps the birds calm. You don't have to worry about them thrashing around and injuring themselves. And it makes it a lot easier to handle them. Also keeps you away from the nest box itself. Extended periods around the nest box can be an indicator for predators to pick up a scent. So when we visit the boxes, it's a quick examination and then get out. So it's going to be for an extended period, again, like banding. As see here, David, a rather youthful David, again, back in the 1970s, banded close to 300 nestlings during his time in Connecticut. This is what we have to be very careful with. These birds are very close to fledging. They're probably 16 days old. If we do find these birds like this, very quickly close the box. They're easily frightened at this point, and they're likely to hop out of the box. And if they do that, they can be very difficult to catch and put back in the box. We've only had that happen to us once. Fortunately, we were able to get them back into the box. Again, the adults will not abandon them if the birds are handled. So this was a quick photo and then close the box up. This is a very newly fledged bird. This is within minutes of leaving the box. So this guy is literally no more than 10-15 minutes out of the box. This is a young female on her first day out of the box. Most songbird nestlings or juveniles can't be told apart. They're very similar in appearance. With bluebirds, it's relatively straightforward and easy. Even at this stage, females will have very little blue in the wing or tail. And their backs are a little grayer overall, a little heavily spotted on the back. Young male bluebirds will have much more blue in the wing and in the tail. When they first leave the box, they'll often spend a lot of time on the ground. This is one of the most dangerous periods for them, exposes them to all manner of predators. It's really important that they don't fledge early. Again, when you open that box, you don't want them to escape, because they're not real strong flyers at this point, but they do need to have at least the ability to fly 50 or so feet so they can escape into nearby cover. Fledglings will usually stay together, closely together in the first couple of weeks. Bird on the upper left at the top is a female. Again, very little blue in the wing. Bird on the lower right is a male. You can see much more blue in the wing and the tail. The parents will continue to feed the birds for about 3 weeks. The female in the first couple of days will join the male in feeding the offspring, but females will almost always start looking for their second nesting. So first brood, she will, within sometimes the same day, but usually no more than a week, will start building either a new nest or a nest on top of the old nest if it's not cleaned out. And she will not take part in feeding the juveniles at that point, the youngsters. The male will continue to do it for about 3 weeks on his own. The female will be busy laying eggs and incubating the second brood. Bluebirds in our area do have a minimum of 2 broods, and 3 broods is fairly common. Northern end of their range often just have a single brood and sometimes 2. The young birds normally, when they fledge, will head to cover, but occasionally they'll remain very close or even on the box, waiting for the handout from Dad. Within 4 or 5 days, they begin actively foraging on their own. They'll go to the ground searching. They learn that from observing the parents. But even at this stage, while they're capable of finding some food on their own, the adult still takes care of them for that full 3-week period. This is a young male fledgling. Typical feeding posture. Both the male and female will use a very low perch, usually 2, 3, 4 feet off the ground. They're actively hunting while perched. You can see the way his head's cocked, he's staring down at the ground. They have excellent eyesight, easily pick up small prey, insects, spiders, on the ground at 100 feet. If there's movement involved, that the insect is moving around, they can easily spot it out at 140 feet. It's a pretty long distance for a little tiny bird. So eyesight is really good. They tend to only bring 1 food item at a time to a nest. Rarely we see them carry multiple items. The first 3 or 4 days while the female is brooding, the male alone will bring food to the nest box. Normally they don't seem to adjust to bringing smaller prey items initially. So sometimes they'll bring an item that's simply too big for the young to swallow. After a couple of attempts to force him, the female will generally take the larger food item and get a meal. Both adults will feed the juveniles once their brooding is complete. The female is as active as the male. Young bluebirds do not come to the entrance hole. They remain well down into the nest. Unlike tree swallows, slides earlier, this is the male tree swallow. Again, between 4 and 5 boxes at hatching will normally be taken over by tree swallows. Their young, once they're a little bit older, will come to the entrance hole like this, and they'll stick their heads out and wait for mom or dad to bring food. Bluebirds do not do that. Those youngsters will remain deep in the box. Tree swallows also bring multiple items at a time. Bluebird will bring a single prey item. You can see the extended throat here, the crop, and you can see some insects in the bill of this female. Notice how big the gape is, how wide the youngster opens its mouth, because here's the basic delivery service. The female or the male will shove her head well into the youngster's throat, and it takes place in a fraction of a second. It's amazingly quick. David's got some great photos here. You can sit and watch. It's almost the blink of an eye. The adult will come in. This happens just like that. Click your fingers, food has been delivered, and she's on the way out. Bluebirds are like most birds. They're very aware of our presence. They are amazingly tolerant of our presence. However, you want to really see the really intimate behaviors and really get close-up monitoring of bluebird boxes. A blind is very helpful. This is one that David put up on his property back in Connecticut. You can start placing that box 40 or 50 feet away. Each day you can move it up just a little bit closer to your desired viewing. The bluebirds adapt to this very quickly. They recognize it's not a threat. You do have to be careful even when you're inside the blind. The bluebirds do spot movement very, very readily, and that will frighten them. And they see movement inside the blind. So even with a blind, you still have to be very careful if you want to get really close. And this is the kind of behavior that David spends hours and hours patiently waiting for. Bonding, maintaining a pair bond throughout the breeding cycle occurs regularly. Wing waving or wing flashing, typical of the male. You see how beautiful that blue color shows. Tells the female, yeah, I'm a very healthy, good providing male. It's a constant reinforcement of that pair bond. Generally stay bonded throughout the year, and in some cases even throughout the winter. Females will mate with more than one male, however. Studies indicate that up to 20% of chicks in any given nest might not have the genes from the what we thought was the adult male in that partnership. Only the female incubates. She has brood patch low down on the belly. She is the only one who stays in the box or even enters the box. Males don't enter the box very often at all, very infrequently. So the female handles all of the incubation of the eggs and all the brooding of the young. The first 3 or 4 days are critical. The young have no ability to regulate their own body temperature. So the females will spend a great deal of time in brooding those young. Once they get past that, about the 5th day or so, they're no longer need to be constantly brooded unless temperatures suddenly drop. First brood of the year here, we know that March, early April can have some pretty cool nights and mornings. So she will spend a little time when the outside air temperature is low. When the female does leave the nest box, the males become a little more aggressive. They patrol the territory, especially near the box, and they will drive off any intruders. So he's very alert when the female is out of the box. Female does need to leave the box when she's either incubating eggs or brooding young. Feather maintenance is still really important, so she'll need some exercise or go out and do a lot of preening of the feathers, and she'll go hunting for a meal as well. Typical, again, foraging posture for this female. Again, a low branch, low perch. She, from that perch, is actively hunting, searching the ground for a prey item. Here she's got a nice big juicy caterpillar of some sort. Male, again, is a really good provider, especially in those early days, that first four days or so while she's brooding. She has to spend a great deal of time in the box, the female. So the male will bring food for the nestlings and for the female as well. Once the initial brooding is done, again, both parents become really active in feeding process. Male at the entrance hole here. Again, he will not enter the box. So he leans in to hand off the prey items, the food to the youngsters. And occasionally a female will build a very small nest. Again, David mentioned only the female will build the nest. Standard nests generally rise up close enough to the base of the entrance hole that they can just sort of lean in. But occasionally you've got early on the young are really tiny, or the nest is a little smaller, and he's really got to lean in to do that feeding. And here there's one short video clip. I hope it'll hit here. You can just see he brings in a food item, leans into the box, and now he's going to go back in, and he picks up a fecal sack and carries that away. Fecal sack, again, is the way to keep the nest clean. It's basically a gelatinous mass in a thin membrane. It contains the urine and fecal material that the adults will carry away. Interestingly, very early on, the first few days, nestlings have very rudimentary digestive systems. So a lot of the nutrients simply pass through, wind up in that fecal sac. If prey is a little hard to come by, food's a little scarce, the female will often eat that fecal sac in the first few days. After that, they simply carry it away. Here, big chunk of, again, that's mostly urine, actually. The fecal sac is comprised almost entirely of urine. Very little fecal matter, even though they call it fecal sac. This is a great photo. Looks like a high diving, off the diving board. This female carrying away the fecal sac. They tend to take it at least 50 feet away, sometimes as much as 100 feet to drop it. Less attracting of predators if they carry it far away from the box. Again, a nice male. They have a great variety of songs. Most songbirds, only the male sings. Female, if she does sing, generally not as vocal, not as powerful a song. Eastern bluebirds, both adults, male and female, sing. They have a great variety of calls. They're constantly in contact with each other. Males sing initially to establish and defend territory, as well as attract a mate. They have a variety of alarm calls, several different calls depending on what the threat is. Different predators elicit a different call. Some of the calls we simply don't know what they're used for, or why they do it, but they do call constantly to each other. They are able, as earlier mentioned, survive cold temperatures. They're able to fluff up their feathers, traps air between the feathers in their body. That air is warmed up and the feathers retain that warmth. So again, if they find food, they'll survive cold temperatures. In the northern part of the range, cold weather and cold rain in particular. Temperature's not as bad, but when it combines with water, as in rain, blows into the box, that can chill the birds really quickly. Hypothermia takes over very quickly and it can lead to a total failure of the nest. Occasionally, if it's severe enough, even the adult will be killed. Fortunately, that doesn't happen here in the Mid-South. An extremely rare event to get that kind of weather here in April. Occasionally, but not too often. It's one of the reasons you want to point your box opening towards the east. Prevailing winds here are from the west. Keep it towards the east. It'll reduce the wind and potential rain getting into the box. Diseases and other infirmities we don't deal with. We don't keep that as part of our project. Only on a rare occasion, fortunately, do we find a bird like this, and what happened here, we don't know. Parasites, other illness, unknown. Now we're getting to the end of the program. We'll talk a little bit about some of the man-made obstacles put in the way of bluebirds. Vandalism. This occurred at Hatchie National Wildlife Refuge last year. Rather crazed individual literally attacked the headquarters building, smashed all the windows, took some kind of weapon to the sign here. The box H10 had an active nest in it. There were eggs in that box. Fortunately, again, bluebird's amazing parents, the female, very tenacious, she came right back to the box and they successfully fledged young out of that box. Part of the job that we do is repair or replace boxes where necessary. This was a really old box. It had been put up by Fish and Wildlife Service personnel at Hatchie National Wildlife Refuge, Haywood County outside of Brownsville. It actually had an active nest in it, but the bottom was falling out. I mean, literally the bottom was falling out of this box. So we replaced that box, took the old nest, the old box down, set it on the ground, put up the new box, opened the old box, removed the nest and eggs, placed it in the new box. And before we left the driveway of that location, female was right back in the box. So again, they're terrific parents. You can visit a box if you have one in your backyard or you maintain a trail. You can visit the box literally every day, briefly, carefully, but the birds will very quickly come right back to the box. Just terrific parents. Theft is also a problem. This pole and box at Shelby Farms disappeared. Somebody stole the entire thing, yanked the pole right out of the ground and took off with it. We've lost quite a few boxes at Shelby Farms, unfortunately. Other damage, sometimes it occurs, we don't know what exactly happened. It did happen. This was at, again, Hatchie National Wildlife Refuge. This one is at Shelby Farms. The mowing equipment ran into that pole and knocked the box down. So we'll end up just by looking at the boxes, this typical setup we use. Again, it can be expensive. We use a little better box. We use 3/4 inch steel galvanized pipe, 7 foot length. You sink 2 feet into the ground, 5 feet sticks above the ground. That's about the optimum height. Bluebirds really don't care. You can find them nesting as low as 2 feet above the ground and occasionally as high as 30 feet above the ground. The 5 foot works really well. It works really well for the humans maintaining the box. At 5 feet above ground, we can look into the box easily. We can open it to clean it, to repair, do any repairs, and just monitor the box. So 5 feet's a pretty perfect height, really. Baffles, again, David mentioned that. It does add to the cost, but it also reduces potential mortality. It's really good at keeping out raccoons and snakes. North American Bluebird Society and most amateurs like us recommend that we put baffles or guards of one type or another on the pole. Professional biologists will sometimes say that's really not the way to do it, that we're depriving the predators of a natural meal. Predators have to eat too, so those raccoons and snakes may be deprived of a meal. But we get pretty protective of what we call our birds. We don't want to see our birds predated in any way. So we use the predator guards and recommend that you do so. Easy to maintain if you do it right. On the left-hand side there, you'll see a box attached to the pole using a flange. The end of the pipe is threaded. Box simply screws onto the flange, makes it really easy if you ever have to take it down for any kind of repair work. If you don't have the flange, which is pretty expensive, it adds up. Box on the right, simply attached with galvanized straps to the back of the box. A little more permanent, takes a little more work if you need to take the box down or repair it. But again, the cost can be prohibitive. You take 100 boxes, a single setup might cost you $40. You use the galvanized pipe and galvanized steel flanges, screws, straps, runs to a lot of dollars, a lot of effort, but this is what we hope to see, and this is what we hope to accomplish. Putting up those boxes, maintaining them properly, is lots of bluebirds. The current population nationwide for Eastern Bluebirds, about 20 million. Again, brought back from darn near going almost to extinction 100 years ago to now where they're at 20 million, and it's almost entirely due to the provision of artificial nest sites, those nest boxes that so many of you out there listening put up and maintain. So it's a real success story for an otherwise delicate bird. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to Kathy for any questions that they might have. But just before we do that, we'll make a couple of acknowledgements, thanking the staff at Hatchie National Wildlife Refuge. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service people have been very supportive. Same thing at the Wolf River Management Area, the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. The TWRA people have been really supportive there in letting us access and put up boxes. And same thing at Shelby Farms. The Shelby Farms Conservancy staff been really good with getting us access to some of the closed areas and assisting us in getting these boxes put up and maintained and keeping an eye on them, as well as folks at the Agri Center. So with that, I guess, Kathy.
Yeah, thank you, Dick, and thank you,
anything?
David. Thank you so much. I think that was a wonderful presentation. Excellent, very interesting and informative. And while our participants think of some questions to enter into the Q&A box, I have written down just a few. I don't think that you guys talked, or I just have a wish you could share with our viewers the preferred habitat for bluebirds. In case people don't know it, in case they're interested in putting up bluebird boxes, where should they place them? In either a yard or on their property, or out on a farm, for example?
Well, the best preferred habitat is adjacent to an open area. Bluebirds forage in short grass. Again, they have really great eyesight. Short grass is perfect. Think of golf courses and cemeteries and athletic fields, but pastures, grasslands, open area. People that are over at Shelby Farms, you see those great big open fields. That's the best place. But the caveat is competition for cavities, the need for cavities, the shortage of them. Bluebirds will adapt if they have to. It's preferred that they have open space. The box should be placed where the entrance hole faces the open space, not facing into woodlands. They will, if they're anywhere in your neighborhood, oftentimes in the winter, people will see more bluebirds. They'll come to feeders a little more regularly in the winter. Doesn't necessarily mean they'll stay there for the breeding season, but we've had success with boxes in suburban areas, in Midtown, places where you might not think a bluebird would show up. So they will surprise you, but the preferred habitat, the most open area, the most open space, put the box there, face it towards the opening. That's the preferred habitat. They don't nest in interior woodlands, extremely rare even at the edges of woodlands. They don't really like that unless the edge opens up in a nice pasture. Then you'll see them. David, you got anything more to
No, that's fine. That's exactly what I would have said. Probably not as well. You got another question?
Yes. So you mentioned a few nest box features that are good. Where would someone who's never had a bluebird box before or is interested in building one, where would they find the best specifications or nest box plans? And can you recommend a good source for pre-constructed bluebird box?
I'll try to answer both that. If they want to build it themselves, they can Google bluebird nest box and it'll lead them to many sources, Audubon sources, and then the American Bluebird Society has a website, and there's lots of dimensional information there. As far as buying them, they can range in price from, well, the cheapest now are about $15, and they can range up to $40 or $50 if you buy them in stores. And one of the troubles with most of the boxes that are available in stores of all kinds, I mean, department stores and hardware stores, often the hole size is wrong. And you can add to Bluebird's problems by putting up the wrong size box, the wrong kind of box, and get starlings in there or house sparrow and so on. When I first started buying the Walmart box that I showed, those red cedar boxes, which are terrific, they were $9.95 a piece. I think they're $13.95 now since COVID and inflation and whatnot. But that's still pretty good. I mean, I doubt you could go to a carpenter and have one build one for anything close to that. So those are the two recommendations I have.
Okay, and I noticed in many of your slides, you guys are using a nest guard on the outside, which is an extra piece of wood with some kind of ring around it. Can you explain the use of that extra block of wood?
Well, two things. Around the entrance hall itself, sometimes the really good ones will be equipped with a little metal ring. That just helps keep the red-bellied woodpeckers and squirrels and things from gnawing on the hole and enlarging the hole so they can get into it. Red-bellied woodpeckers will chip away at the entrance hole so they can get in there. Same thing with squirrels, they'll gnaw on that wood. So that metal ring helps to avoid that. But the little extension, little block of wood that extends out from the hole, that's designed to help eliminate house sparrows. Really persistent house sparrow will still get in there, but they'll often just give up. So if you have that little extension that comes out from the hole, extends outward, that's pretty effective at deterring house sparrows. Not entirely, but at least it's a little extra help to exclude those big pests.
Those blocks, I think another use for them is they make it difficult for a raccoon to reach in and bend down. It's a longer, in terms of their the length of their well, it would be the humerus, but anyway, yeah, it's difficult. It makes it more difficult for them to reach in there and do damage. And I think I would recommend that people think about adding that additional block on boxes where they're not going to use a predator guard. So I'm not, if you have a predator guard, I think that almost becomes unnecessary. But if you don't have a predator guard, then I think that extra block on there, lengthening the entrance hole, is probably useful.
Okay, that's a great suggestion. And it also reminds me that on the Cornell Lab of Ornithology site, they have a lot of different nest box plans and specifications. But one thing that they suggest that hasn't worked well for me on my nest boxes is a nest guard constructed of wire mesh, which is stapled to the front. Do you have any opinion on that?
And it doesn't seem to be terribly effective.
We've never used it.
Yeah. No, I don't. I'm not going to in the future.
Oh, another good source too for the specifications. Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency has a woodworking guide. They've got specifications for about 20 cavity nesting species, which of course includes Eastern Bluebirds. And that's online as well, TWRA website.
Mm-hmm.
And North American Bluebird Society again.
Oh, yes, of course.
But one caveat there. David Pitts, a retired professor of biology and an ornithologist at UT Martin, studied bluebirds for decades. And one of his lines was, almost any box will be suitable for a bluebird. Any box is better than no box. So whether it's the recommended size or it's a little smaller or a little bigger, bluebirds are often desperate enough, they'll take whatever they can get. Standard recommendation is still probably overall the best. Studies have shown bluebirds don't seem to have a real preference. Side by side, small box, big box, seems to be about equal which one they'll pick. So again, putting up a box is the key. Entrance hole is the only thing you really got to worry about. Again, David mentioned 1.5 inch, no smaller, no bigger. The rest of the box dimensions, bluebirds don't really seem to care. Same thing with painting, decorating. Bluebirds seem to have no preference whatsoever. You can paint a box whatever color you want on the exterior. Polka dots, flowers, whatever you aesthetically think is cool. Bluebirds don't seem to care one way or the other. If you do paint the inside of the box, however, light color, white is far better than black. So don't paint the inside black, and yeah, no lead paint. So best not to paint the inside of the box, but the outside of the box, you can paint it whatever you want. Bluebirds won't care at all.
One of the things that amuses us is we'll put up a brand new expensive, our latest boxes are about $40 a piece. We'll put up a brand new beautiful box, and then 100 yards down the road where there's an old beat up one that we've had for about 6 years, and they'll use the old one rather than the new one. I really think they like these old weathered boxes. They come closer to natural cavities, I guess, in their appearance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you know, that's a good point, because we often paint our letter volunteers paint the boxes, but they will use painted boxes, you say, if there's, you know.
Yeah, they'll, especially if it's the only box available, they absolutely will. But studies have shown they really don't seem to have any particular preference, painted, unpainted, decorated, undecorated, side-by-side offerings to the birds. They don't seem to really have a preference.
That's great. Here's a really good question that someone has asked. When do you clear out a nest? Cleaning out nest boxes.
Yeah, two thoughts here. David will add a little bit to that. We prefer to clean them out at the beginning of the nesting season, or just prior to the nesting season, if we can do it towards the end of February, so the box is cleaned out. You don't want to clean them out after the breeding season. Oftentimes, they'll use them over the winter for roosting, communal roosting. You can clean them out, maybe add a little material to the bottom. It helps winter survival. Generally, you want to clean the box out after the first brood. Some people have different opinions on that. Blowflies are not a real big problem here, but they are a problem. They are nest parasites. One of the other insects that will live in bluebird nests is a species of wasp that are parasitic on the blowflies. So if you take the old nest out that contains the wasp larvae and adults, you're eliminating a little bit of a layer of protection against blowflies. But overall, I think it's far better to clean the box out after they fledged. Timeline's pretty easy to figure out if you're observant. Egg a day for 5 days. Incubation is going to be anywhere from 11 to 17 days. Here in the South, a little bit shorter. They'll fledge at about 17, 18, 19 days. So you can add all that up. You know about when the last baby is going to leave the nest. Go in, open the box up, clean it out, scrape down the sides, remove the old nest. Females can build a new nest in as little as 4 or 5 days. An experienced female, second, third brood, can build a nest in 2 days. So it's not a big deal for them to build a new nest. If you don't clean the old nest out, they won't reuse that nest. They'll simply build another one on top of it. If you don't clean the box, third brood, the nest is going to be almost to the entrance hole. It puts the young at risk. You want that nest down at the bottom of the box, not up near the top of the entrance hole. Again, predators can get at them a little easier. So yeah, clean the box out. It's far better overall. Clean the box out after the last bird fledges. Certainly by the onset of breeding, you want to do that. And leave the box up with the last nest. You can leave it there for over winter. No problem at all.
Great. Okay, here's another question. I would like to know where bluebirds nest when there aren't any boxes available.
Just about anywhere.
Yeah, but abandoned woodpecker holes are the standard thing. And you know, Dick mentioned that when these ice storms knock down all these dead trees, or people will chop down dead trees for whatever reason, aesthetics, or because they consider it a hazard, and that eliminates lots of natural cavities.
Yeah, so bluebirds have been seen nesting in really bizarre places, old PVC pipes. They'll nest if you hang an old milk jug, cut a hole in it and hang it up. They'll go to that. They'll use purple martin boxes Apartments or gourds, if the martins haven't taken them over yet. They're desperate for any cavity. Historically, they were open cup nesters. So way back millennia ago, they didn't use cavities at all. They used open nests like the other members of the thrush family, robins, wood thrushes. They have open cup nests on a limb. That used to be what bluebirds did. They've evolved since then to use cavities, and now they only use cavities. They no longer build open cup nests out on a tree limb. So any hole, any cavity, if they're desperate enough, after copulation, the female starts developing eggs, and she's got to find some place to lay them. So literally any hole will do if she can get in it. But those are often precarious. Nest survival rates are lower. So that bluebird box is the safe harbor, the best place for them to nest. So putting up a box is great. Otherwise, they will find a hole somewhere, hopefully.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you could comment on the importance of native plants and natural habitat and the protection of that for the sake of bluebirds and other birds, for that matter.
Well, here again, I'm not much of a botanist, but websites will give you a list of trees. Dick mentioned a couple with the sumac and dogwood berries, but there are a bunch of trees and bushes that you can plant that favor the food that bluebirds use in the wintertime.
Yeah, winter feeding is really the most important. During the summer, spring, summer, fall, they're getting by almost entirely on insects, certainly feeding the young. They need that protein from the insect material. So they're almost exclusively feeding on insects. In the winter, obviously insects are not readily available, especially if you have a really deep freeze that goes on for a couple of days. In the winter, their diet consists primarily of small fruits and berries and spiders. Spiders are fairly easily found in the winter, unlike most other, unlike insects. Spiders are not insects. So any of the species of sumac, smooth sumac in particular, staghorn, honeysuckle is a really good one. Bittersweet's a really good one. These are all native plants. Deciduous holly is a great one. It's probably the highest calorie content. The unfortunate part is mockingbirds love holly, and they will stake out holly and they'll chase away any intruder, particularly bluebirds. They have no chance to outwit a mockingbird. And calories, oh, by the way, just an interesting thing. Bluebirds need about 35,000 calories a day, but that's in actual calories. Humans are recommended to have like a 2,000 calorie a day, but they're really calories. Nutritionists use calorie, but they're really kilocalories. So humans are actually consuming about 200,000 calories a day, not 2,000. Bluebirds need about 35,000. Still a lot. So they've got to feed a lot, especially during winter. So yeah, any of those native plants, sumacs, bittersweet, deciduous holly is great. Honeysuckle is another great one.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I noticed that bluebirds were using a lot of caterpillars, especially when they were feeding their young. And those caterpillars need leaves to eat. So,
oh yeah,
native plants also support the insect population. Yeah. So that's great. Yeah, well, I think that is it for our questions. And so unless y'all like to say anything else, I think that was just absolutely wonderful information. And this will remain on our YouTube channel as a community resource and a very valuable one, I think.
well, I'll add one comment. Lifespan.
Okay.
People sometimes ask about that. Bluebirds in particular have an extremely high mortality rate. Young of the year, it's about 75% will die. They won't reach the end of the year. In an average year, 50% of adults will die. So a very high mortality rate, which is another reason why we like to put up these boxes to help them any way we can. So the average lifespan of a bluebird is less than a year and a half. It's about a year and 5 months. If they survive that first year, then their mortality rate drops and they can live about 3 years. 4 years is getting up there for bluebird. 5 years is really old. The oldest documented bluebird, a male, lived to be 8 years in the wild, in captivity 10 years. So bluebirds extremely high mortality rates and very short lifespans. If they get to breed more than once, that's unusual. So all the birds that we see this year, all the adults, half of them won't be here next year. And all the juveniles that do fledge out this year, 75% of those won't come back next year. They'll be gone.
Wow.
So it's
That's
an
amazing.
amazingly high mortality rate.
Before I close, there's just one more question I have to ask, which is, when did people start putting up artificial nest boxes for bluebirds, and what effect did that have on the population? Is that documented?
Yeah, it pretty much saved the population. Again, the introduction of starlings and house sparrows in the early 1900s, those two birds, their populations absolutely exploded. They outcompeted a great many of the cavity nesters, but bluebirds in particular, starlings and house sparrows dominate them. They simply take over the natural cavities and evict any bluebirds that might be in those cavities. So by about the mid-50s, it started to become really popular to put up bluebird boxes and bluebird trails. And from there it took off. North American Bluebird Society, lots of other state societies have their bluebird societies, a lot of bluebird clubs. Bluebird's a really popular bird with people like purple martins. They have a big fan base. So that population, again, was after the introduction of starlings and house sparrows in those early 1900s, late 1890s, early 1900s, that decimated their population nationwide. They were not really far from extinction when in numbers.
And then people, I guess there were ornithological birders back then who were putting up nest boxes to count.
Yeah, well, people started to say, where are the bluebirds? Where are the bluebirds gone? Why are we not seeing bluebirds anymore? And that was why. And those nest boxes were one of the solutions that were recommended. Became really popular. They're easy to observe. They're friendly. They're cheerful. They're cool looking birds. Readily adapt to human habitation. Readily adapt to your family farm, your backyard. So boxes became very popular. Watching bluebirds became very popular. Nest boxes became readily available. And again, now we're sitting at about 20 million total population. That's steady in most places and actually increasing in others. Despite that high mortality rate, 3 broods a year, that's what saves them, along with those artificial nest boxes. More boxes that go up, bigger the population will be.
That's great. Well, we'll keep putting them up, and we really appreciate the boxes that you put up along the Ghost River State Natural Areas as well, out there close to the Bateman Bridge.
Yeah, they're all being used.
Yeah, that's just great. Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm going to ask if, I'm not sure if Eric is still on. Eric, you still here?
I sure am.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn this over to you, and I'll see Dick and David later sometime at a TOS meeting. Okay.
Wonderful. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. And for everybody watching, for more educational content like that, please follow us on our social media accounts or check our website, wolfriver.org. And you can go to our calendar there to view. We host webinars like this every month. And please join us out at one of our many events. But thank you, everybody, for joining us. And gentlemen, once again, awesome presentation. Thank you so much for your time. Everybody have a great day.